Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Kari, and today I'm going to be talking about some of my favorite books of all time. Rather than just make a list of like my favorite books of all time, I thought it'd be really fun to do a book tag that talks about my favorite books because they group the books together in a really interesting way, so I thought that would be a fun way to go about it. This tag was originally created by Steph, so I'm going to link her channel and her original video down in the description box. If you've been here before, you may notice that my library setup is a little bit different. You're kind of getting a sneak preview of an upcoming video where I may or may not be doubling the size of my home library. So here's a little sneak peek. That video's to come. Keep an eye out for that. So there are 15 books in this book tag, and I'm gonna do my best not to repeat the same books over and over again for all of the questions so that I'm able to talk about even more of my favorite books. So I would consider all of these books that I'm gonna talk about some of my favorite books of all time. I've given all of them 5 stars. So I hope that you find something in this video that interests you, and maybe you'll find a new favorite book as well. So this book tag, it doesn't waste any time. The first question on the list is, what do you tell people is your favorite book? Now, I don't know anybody that if you ask them what is your favorite book, that they could just give you one answer. Like, do those people exist that could just give you one book that is their favorite? I mean, that's impressive if you can do that. I admire the self-control. Personally, I cannot narrow it down to just one, so I'm gonna give you a few. The first book that I always mention when people ask me what is your favorite book is The Secret History by Donna Tartt. I love this book so much. I know that it's really hyped, and some people would say even overhyped, but I totally disagree. I think it's 1000% worth the hype. The writing is so beautiful. Like, Donna Tartt's talent in making every sentence so beautiful and poetic. I just love soaking up literally every sentence of this book. And also, if you've been here before, you know that I love books set in academic settings, and this is like the academic setting book. I just love this book with my entire heart. The second book that I always mention when people ask me what my favorite books are is another divisive one, and that's House of Leaves by Mark Z. Danielewski. People definitely either love or hate this book. Personally, obviously, I freaking love this book. It was such a good time. If you don't know what this is about, it's a horror book where this man moves into a house, and the house is bigger on the inside than it is on the outside. And we follow multiple timelines, multiple points of view of people trying to figure out more about this house. And there's a really big like interactive puzzle element to this book where you're trying to figure out what's real, what's not real, what are the connections between these people that we have their point of view. It's such a good time. I remember one day when I was reading this, I literally sat on the couch for 5.5 hours reading this nonstop for 5.5 hours because I was so enthralled. It didn't even feel like 5.5 hours. Honestly, I'm not exaggerating. It felt like a maximum of 1 hour had passed. That's how enthralled into this book that I was. Also, I love the really unique format of this book because if you don't know, there are many different types of documents within the pages of this book, and there's lots of annotations and footnotes, and you just have to flip back and forth throughout the whole book to figure out what's happening, and it's so fun. I would definitely recommend this if you like unique books. Another book that is definitely one of my favorites is Bunny by Mona Awad. As with House of Leaves, this book is really unique as well, but in a really different way. House of Leaves, the format is really unique, but in Bunny, it's the story, it's really unique and bizarre and strange, and that can really turn people off of this book. Now that I'm talking about it, I'm realizing that all of the books on this list of books that I tell people are my favorite books of all time are all divisive books. People either love these books or they hate them. So this definitely fits into that category. People either love Bunny or they really hate it. And obviously I love it. I think it's so strange and bizarre and leaves you wondering what the hell is happening. And it's such a good time. So as I just said, I'm realizing all of these books are very divisive, and this one is no different. A Little Life by Hanya Yanagihara. People love this book or they really hate it. I'm obsessed with this book. It's beautiful. The writing is insane. It's incredible how talented Hanya Yanagihara is at writing. I would put this at the same level as like Donna Tartt's The Secret History. The writing is just insane. And I love a book that can make me cry as hard as this book made me cry. I love a sad book, and this is like the sad book. So I freaking love A Little Life. And my fifth and final book that I'm going to put on this question of books that I tell people are my favorite books of all time is Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte. Again, Another very divisive book. People love it or they hate it. There's no in between with Wuthering Heights. It's a dark gothic story about isolation, toxic relationships, because yes, Wuthering Heights is not a romance book. I don't know who did the PR on Wuthering Heights to make people think that this is a love story. It's not a love story. It's a very dark and obsessive and twisted relationship that they have. It's nothing to aspire to. But this is peak gothic Victorian literature and it's divine. Question number 2 is a book that's your guilty pleasure. So I take guilty pleasure to mean like maybe a book that's super commercial, or maybe it's like a little bit stupid at one point but you love it anyway, or maybe it's like unbelievable at one point but you love it anyway. And for this, I'm definitely going to say Lock Every Door by Riley Sager. This is a thriller about a young woman who becomes like an apartment sitter in this really rich apartment building in New York. I could not put this book down. I stayed up so late on a weeknight. I could not put this book down. I didn't go to sleep until like 4 a.m. that night because I could not stop reading this book. I had to know how it ended. This was just such a fun page turner and I really enjoyed my time in this book. So apparently there's a hot take portion in this book tag because the next question is a book everyone loved but you didn't. And I'm actually going to talk about 4 different books that I feel like everybody loves and I just don't get it. The first 2 that I'm going to talk about are 2 thrillers that I feel like everybody freaking loved in like 2021 and I do not get it. The first one is In My Dreams I Hold a Knife by Ashley Winstead. I love an academic setting. There's an academic setting. I love a thriller. It's a thriller. This book, it was so boring. It was so boring. Like, seriously, I had to force myself to finish this book. It was so bad, and I don't get the hype around this book. Like, everybody, literally everybody that reads thrillers was saying how much they love this book, and I'm a huge thriller reader. I love thrillers. I read them all the time. It was so bad. And the other thriller that I feel like everybody loves, but I just don't get it, is They Never Learn by Lane Fargo. Again, another academic setting thriller. You would think that I would love this and it's like a good for her book, but I just did not care. And I guess the like twist that comes, I think it was like 3/4 of the way through, I guess that twist pretty early on. And in a thriller, I need to be surprised. So that was a huge problem for me. I just don't get, I don't get it, why everybody loves this one so much. Again, these are probably hot takes. I'm sorry if you love these books. It's just my personal opinion. The third book that I feel like everybody loves, but I absolutely do not, is a literary fiction book, and that's Matrix by Lauren Groff. This was pitched to me as lesbian nuns in France in the 1100s. That sounds fucking amazing. I was sold. And as soon as I saw how beautiful this cover was, which by the way, this is one of my favorite book covers of all time, even though I hate the book, I was like, I need that book in my life, and I read it right away. Again, so boring. It was so boring. Like, that pitch was incredible. Like, it sounds like all the elements I would love, and it just really fell short. I don't get the hype around this book, but the hype around the cover, that's merited. The next 2 books that I'm going to mention are classics. The first one is Fahrenheit 451 by Ray Bradbury. I thought I was going to absolutely love this book, but I didn't. I really didn't like this book. I get that it's a really important book and like the themes are really important, but as entertainment value, I don't know, I just really didn't like this one. And this last one is probably the hottest take that I have. I don't like The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. Everybody loves this book, but I don't get it. I don't get it. Now, I will say that I love Oscar Wilde's one-liners in this book. He makes a lot of funny comments about Americans in France in this book, and I found that amazing. But the story itself, I just don't get it. I don't get it. And I wanted to love this because it's Gothic Victorian, which is something that I love. Like I said, Wuthering Heights is one of my favorite books of all time, but this missed the mark for me. All right, that's the end of the hot take section. So we'll go back to the books that I actually think are good. The next question is the book that you read the fastest, and I think I would have to say Bunny by Mona Awad. I think I read this in 1 day, maybe max 2 days, like a day and a half, because I could not put this down. I had to know what was gonna happen. It was so weird, so bizarre. I needed to know how it was going to end, and the ending did not disappoint. The next question is a book that you think deserves more hype, and I'm definitely going to say Animal by Lisa Taddeo. This is one of those unlikable characters, female rage, literary fiction books that I adore. And Lisa Taddeo does it so well in this book. Basically, just to give you an idea of what this book is about, it follows a young woman and she lives in New York, and at the very beginning of the story, a man commits suicide right in front of her at a restaurant, and that is really traumatic for her, obviously. And so she ends up moving out to California, and that's really where the story picks up. And we see how she starts to kind of start her life over, and we understand that she's looking for someone in California, but we don't know who and we don't know why. But like I said, this is one of those female rage books because she's very rageful. And as I said before, she is an unlikable main character, which personally I love reading about unlikable characters, but if that's something that you're not into, keep that in mind. But I really think with the popularity of all these female rage books recently, I don't know why people don't talk about this book. Like, it's the epitome of female rage books. The next question is a book that's becoming a movie, and Bunny by Mona Awad, again, it keeps popping up on this list, but this is becoming a movie. It was actually just announced, so I don't think that there's too many details, but I'm very excited about this, but I feel like the casting is going to be crucial for this one. I hope that they don't ruin it with the casting. Another one of my favorite books that's supposed to be becoming a movie, I think the rights were bought in 2020 or 2021, but I haven't heard anything recently, so maybe, I don't know if it's still happening or not, but technically The Push by Ashley O'Drain is supposed to be becoming a movie. I think this would be a great movie, so I hope that they're still going through with it, but we'll see. The next question is a book that you've reread the most. I actually don't reread really that much. There's only a handful of books that I've ever reread, but these two books here I've reread a good amount of times for someone who really never rereads. The first one is Shirley Jackson's We Have Always Lived in the Castle. I've read this 3 times, and I just absolutely love this book. It's so good, and it's so short, so it's really conducive to a reread. I often read it at Halloween time, and I would definitely recommend it for a good October read, but honestly, you could read it anytime. It's not specifically a Halloween book, but it just gives you those good creepy vibes. And the second book that I've reread the most, I've actually reread more than We Have Always Lived in the Castle, and that's The Yellow Wallpaper by Charlotte Perkins Gilman. This is actually a short story that I had to read for the first time when I was in university, and I enjoyed it so much that I've gone on to read it multiple times. I think I've read it like 4 or 5 times now. Again, usually in October because it is kind of like a spooky story. But if you read this book, I would really recommend looking up the history of the story and the author because it's way more interesting if you know why Charlotte Perkins Gilman wrote this book and what she was inspired by. Because if you just read it the way that it is, it kind of seems like a haunted house story, but in reality, it's a commentary on hysteria and the rest cure. I love this little story. It's so good. Next is a favorite book from a genre you don't usually read. So personally, I never read fantasy books ever, but last year I started reading the A Song of Ice and Fire series by George R.R. Martin, aka the Game of Thrones book series, and I fell head over heels for these books. Now, I will say that I had watched the TV show, the full TV show, before reading the books, so I already knew that I loved the story, so maybe that influenced me a little bit. Maybe I wouldn't have had the same reaction if I had just jumped straight into the books. I don't know, but as someone who literally never reads fantasy, I was really surprised how much I absolutely loved these books. I read the first 4 out of the 5 published books in the series last year, and I'm going to read the 5th book this year. I'm really looking forward to it. But the Game of Thrones books are some of my favorite books, and it's definitely not a genre I ever read. The next question is a book that deserves all the hype that it gets. I kind of mentioned this in the very first question because I would say that The Secret History deserves all the hype it gets. It's as good as people say it is. It's definitely not overhyped, and people talk about it so much for a good reason. And I would say the same thing goes for A Little Life by Hanya Yanagihara. People talk about this book all the time for a good reason. It's incredible. Some people might say that this book gets hyped for the wrong reasons, but personally, I love this book. I'm glad that it gets hyped because the hype is what made me read it. The next question is a book that you usually recommend when someone asks for a book recommendation. Now, this is kind of complicated for me because maybe you've noticed that a lot of my favorite books are very divisive. Some of them are very weird, bizarre. I don't think that the general reading public would enjoy all of these books that I love so much. So if I were to make just a general recommendation to somebody who I don't know their reading taste very well, these are the books that I would recommend to them. The first one is one that I've already talked about, and that's Lock Every Door. I think anybody could really enjoy this book because it's really fast paced, it's really fun, and like I said, it's a page turner, so I think anybody could like this book. So it's a pretty safe recommendation. Same thing for Piranesi by Susanna Clarke. I love this book, definitely one of my favorite books of all time. I think people who read any genre of book would love this book because people who read fantasy would love this book, people who read literary fiction would love this book, people who read thrillers would love this book. I think really anybody could love this book, and It's amazing. I would definitely recommend this to anyone. The last book that I would recommend to anyone, I would first make sure that they're okay with the very difficult content of this book, but as soon as I finished reading this book, I thought this is something that everyone needs to read. Literally everyone, as long as they're okay with the difficult content, but that's Know My Name by Chanel Miller. It's so important and so powerful, and I just think everyone should read this book if they're okay with the difficult content that's inside. As many people as possible should read this book. The next question is a book that has your favorite character in it, and again, this is a really hard question to answer because I love books about unlikable characters. So it's not that I love these characters and like want to be friends with them or anything. Like, they're not good people most of the time. Like, I enjoy reading about that, so this is kind of a difficult question to answer for me. So I think that I would have to say Tyrion in the A Song of Ice and Fire series, because even though he's not like the greatest person, he's really fun to read about and he's really funny, and I'm always excited when the POV comes back to his chapters, so I think I would have to say Tyrion. And this next question is kind of in a similar vein to that question, because it's what is a book that you wish you could live in, and I don't know if I would live in any of the books that I've talked about already. Like, I don't want to live in a scary ass house in House of Leaves. I don't want to be murdered by my friends in The Secret History. I don't want to have the most like traumatic life ever in A Little Life. I don't want to be murdered in A Song of Ice and Fire. I don't want to literally lose my mind like in The Yellow Wallpaper. Like, all of my favorite books, I would definitely not want to live in them. Like, they're not good places to be. So honestly, the only one of my favorite books that I've ever read that I would actually want to live in the world that it's set in is a nonfiction book, and that's Etanais by Lisa Hilton. This is a nonfiction book about the mistress of King Louis XIV in France. And so King Louis XIV is the one who built the Chateau de Versailles. And if you don't know, I live in Paris and it's really close to Versailles, so I go to the Chateau de Versailles all the time because I'm freaking obsessed with Versailles. So I would have to say I'd like to live in this book because then I could live at the Versailles Castle. I could wear the crazy dresses that they wore. Now, that's not to say that their life was 100% glamorous, because the hygiene back then was really bad, so I mean, that wouldn't be great, but to live in the Chateau de Versailles, that would be incredible. So my answer to this, I want to live in Etanais by Lisa Hilton. The next question is a book you thought you would hate but you ended up loving. So last year I had read a lot of books that were on the Women's Prize for Fiction long list, and then I tried to read the entire shortlist, but I kind of got distracted because some of the books that I read for the shortlist I just did not like, and they were putting me into a reading slump. And so I was really hesitant about picking up Sorrow and Bliss by Meg Mason because I was just not connecting with the books I was picking up that were on the shortlist last year. But I'm so glad that I did, because oh my god, this book is amazing. It's an incredible study of mental health, and the writing is so smart and so witty. I just absolutely love this book. So I really didn't go into it with high hopes or high expectations, but I came out with a new favorite book. The next question is a book that made you cry. And as I said before, I love when a book can make me cry. Like, if a book can make me cry, it has a way bigger chance of becoming a favorite book of all time. Like, I just love that a book can move you to cry like that you care enough about what you're reading that it makes you cry. So I have a few of my favorite books here that have made me cry. So the first one, obviously, when you think of crying at a book, you think of A Little Life. I mean, this is the crying book, the sad book. So if you want to cry, read A Little Life. It made me cry my eyes out. The next one is one that I've already talked about as well, and that's Know My Name by Chanel Miller. So terrible, the things that she went through. I cried my eyes out at this book. Next, we have My Dark Vanessa by Kate Elizabeth Russell. This is a really difficult book to read about a teacher that's grooming one of his students, and it's from the perspective of the student. And it's just so painful to read in certain points that I cried a lot. Another book that made me cry is Clara and the Sun by Kazuo Ishiguro. It was at the end, and I still think about the end of this book and how much it made me cry. I came undone at the end of this book. It was so sad. I still think about it all the time, how sad the end of this book was and how emotional and how much I was crying at the end of this, and I was just so surprised at how much this book moved me. And the last book I'm going to mention for books that made me cry is actually a nonfiction, and it's Eating Animals by Jonathan Safran Foer. I read this in 2021 when I was making the transition to become vegetarian, and this book is all about the horrible treatment of animals, and I'm a huge animal lover. Like, that's why I've decided to go vegetarian, because freaking love animals, and the things that he describes in this book are insanely painful to read about. Like, so hard to read about, and I just cried my eyeballs out at probably like 60% of this book. I was just crying. But it's a very good read. This book literally changed my life, and I would definitely recommend it if you want to learn more about factory farming and the horrible ways that animals are treated there. And the last question is a book that you wish that you could read again for the first time. So I've picked 3 books for this question because all 3 of these books, there's some kind of twist in the book that obviously I know what it is now. I can't go back and read the book as if I didn't know what those twists are. So I really wish that I could go back and be oblivious to what's going to happen and just enjoy it for the first time again. The first one being I'm Thinking of Ending Things by Ian Reid. If you know, you know. Like, you can never unknow the end of this book, but I wish I could go back and read it for the first time again and just read in oblivion and not know what's coming. But I will say that I did reread this book, and it was fun to reread it knowing what's going to happen so that you can kind of pick up on what's really happening. You know where it's going, so you understand all the little hints and clues that you're getting. And I obviously have to say Bunny by Mona Awad, the ending, I mean, if I could reread this and not know what's coming again, that would be so fun, and just to experience that like stare at the wall moment again. Because when I finished reading this, I literally just stared at the wall and was like, what the fuck? like I want that again. And same thing for House of Leaves by Mark C. Danielewski. Like, this was a freaking ride, and I wish that I could experience it in oblivion again. I do really want to reread this. I read this in like the middle of 2021, so I'm trying to put some space between me and when I first read it, because I want to reread it after I've like forgotten a lot of the things that have happened, because it's really, really long, so it'd be easy to forget a lot of the stuff that's in here. So I am going to reread it, and kind of like I'm Thinking of Ending Things, it will be fun to reread it knowing where it's going and to be able to pick up on stuff that I wasn't able to the first time reading it. But I do wish I could experience it for the first time again, because it was just such an immersive like few days of my life where all I could think about was this book. I just want to experience that again. All right guys, so that's the end of this favorite books tag. I hope that something I mentioned piqued your interest and you're gonna add it to your TBR. You'll definitely have to let me know if that's the case. Let me know in the comments what sounded good to you. What are you going to read? Also, let me know if you've already read any of these. Do you agree with me? Did you like them as much as I do? Also, for the hot takes portion of this tag, do you agree with my hot take? Are you upset about my hot takes? I hope you're not upset. Again, that was just an opinion. I would absolutely love for you to do this tag in the comments. I'm gonna put all the questions in the description box. You could just copy paste and then do it for yourself. I would love to see what your answers are. And don't be afraid to put more than one answer like I did, because I totally understand it's really hard to pick one. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like. It's a great way to support my channel and to help more people see this video. I would really, really appreciate it. And subscribe if you haven't already, because I would love to have you back. And I'll talk to you again next time. Bye!